Hey guys, welcome back to a new BMW Blog podcast. We're actually in Orlando today. We have a new setup here, and I am joined by Tom Plucinsky, the head of BMW Classic USA, and Sean Myers, the owner and CEO of the Precision Sport Industries, who is hosting us today here in Orlando. This year, it's all about BMW celebrations. Aside from the rebirth of the Neue Klasse, the brand celebrates quite a few milestones. 50 years of BMW 3 Series, 50 years of BMW USA, and 40 years of the BMW M3. In this podcast, we will talk in detail about these iconic BMW products, and then, of course, about some other exciting classics. So with that being said, gentlemen, thanks for coming. Thanks for joining us today. Should be a lot of interesting things to talk about, and we're going to dive right in. And we're going to start with the 50 years of the BMW 3 Series. And Tom, this is your domain, so we're going to let you do most of the talking today. We're going to enjoy the coffee and just hear some interesting stories. But before we go into the more personal stories, let's start maybe with the birth of the 3 Series, and that's with the E21. And the question for you is how it redefined the concept of the compact sports sedan in 1975.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. I'm happy to be here. Thanks, Sean, for hosting us. Yeah. This is going to be fun. So, first 3 Series. There's an interesting story behind the first 3 Series, and it starts with a gentleman by the name of Bob Lutz. Some of the fans may remember that name. He's now retired, but he had a long and illustrious career in the automotive industry, and he spent a short 3 years early in his career at BMW. When he arrived in 1972, his staff said to him, you got to see the replacement for the 2002 because it's pretty bad. And he went, what? And so he called up the head of body engineering, who was the Mr. Hofmeister, who we know from a certain kink. And Hofmeister said, no, you can't see the car. It's done. We're going to production in 6 months. And Lutz said, well, no, I'm responsible for selling this thing, so I want to see it. So it depends who you talk to, but if you talk to Lutz said it was hideous. No tumble home, the windows were straight up, the roof was quite high. If you talk to some of the design people from the time, they said it was okay. Essentially, it looked like the 2002 Touring with that sort of cam back look, and Lutz didn't like it. So they decided that they needed to redo the car, and Hofmeister used to make the bodies out of wood rather than clay in those days because you couldn't get the quality of the body shape and the being able to develop the tooling from a clay model. So it had to be out of wood, and you couldn't change wood. Once it's done, it's done. So Lutz went, well, we've got to get some clay. So BMW didn't have any clay at that time, and all the clay in Europe was being purchased by Opel, which is where Lutz came from. So Lutz called his old buddies up at Opel and said, hey, can we buy some clay off you guys? I went, yeah, sure. How much do you need? Enough to do 3 cars. And they went, okay, yeah, we'll send it over. They said, do you have the tools? And I was like, no, we don't have the tools. Okay, this is where you can buy the tools. And this is all documented in Lutz's book, but I've also sat with Lutz and he's told the story, which is pretty darn cool.
That's cool. Yeah.
And then they said, well, do you know how to model clay? And he went, no, nobody here knows how to model clay. So Opel sent some people over to model the first 3 cars. The first 3 cars were the E21, so the first 3 Series, the first 7 Series, E23, and the 6 Series, E24. And that's where clay modeling started at BMW. Now, design was really under body engineering at that time. So Hofmeister was the guy in charge, and there was a gentleman by the name of Paul Brock who was the designer. And Paul had kind of had a good career at Mercedes-Benz, and he came to BMW, and he was brought in by one of the board members. So he was brought in by someone higher than Hofmeister, and Hofmeister didn't really like it. So poor Paul Brock was kind of locked in the basement and couldn't do a lot. Prior to Paul Brock arriving, though, a lot of the design for BMWs was done by externals, so like Bertone and Vignali and Michelotti and some of the Italian, some of the other Italian coachwork builders. Yeah. So the one thing about Lutz is he really, throughout his career, he really is a lover of design, and he's always been super supportive of the design departments at companies. So he liberated Paul Brock and got him started on the 21. He also got him started on the turbo concept that we had at Pebble Beach last year. And that was probably Brock's one of his masterpieces in his career is that turbo concept from 1972. And that car was done to do to showcase BMW at the Olympics that were in Munich in 1972. Right across the road, you've seen the Olympic Village there. So Lutz wanted to do something spectacular for the Olympics, and that was that car. So that's how we ended up with the 3 Series coming out in 1975 in Europe and 1977 model year, I think, here. In order to continue they had to continue to sell the 2002 for several years. So that's how the facelift of the 2002 happened with the square taillights. So that was the interim model until the new 3 Series came. New 3 Series was a big seller for us, and it was really great in North America, and it really put us on the road to growth here.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that it's the most iconic BMW today and one of the most iconic models out there?
I don't know. I
mean,
yeah, Sean.
I think the E30 from a 3 Series perspective
I think the
is
E30
probably
too.
the most iconic.
Yeah.
And I think the E21. I mean, the E21 is just the bridge from the 2002 into the E30. And, you know, one of the things that I love about the E21 is I love the interior dash, how it faces the driver, very much so, which is much different from the 2002, which had the flat sort of dash. But the E21, I think, is it's kind of lost.
And I would say that of the 3 cars that were designed at the same time, the 6 Series really was the icon, the sharp nose. Yeah, you see that in the 21, but it wasn't quite as pronounced. It's a smaller car. It needed to have a taller roof. You know, it's a bread and butter car, so it couldn't be quite as beautifully styled as the 6 Series was. So,
but the refinement, I would say, from 2002 to E21, there's definitely a step up.
Yeah.
It looks like there's 10 years in between the cars, and there's
Absolutely.
only a couple years.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at all the generations, 7 Series, I believe there's 7 right now, 8-1 on the way. How do you see the evolution of these cars? Where do you see maybe the biggest jumps in between cars as far as design and technology as well? Maybe like you already mentioned, the E30 is probably the most iconic one, but let's go maybe, from E30 on now.
But we're talking 3 Series still?
3 Series still,
okay.
yeah.
Okay. I would say, I think from E30 to E36 was a massive jump. BMW was a fairly conservative company design-wise, and I would say styling-wise, prior to the E36 3 Series. And I had started at the tail end of the E30, so my first company cars were E30s. I was a trainer for technicians when I started with BMW, and the E30 was a fairly simple car, well designed, well built. It looked, by the time I joined in 1989, it looked quite dated.
Okay.
Compared to some of the other cars that were on the market, and the E36 brought the car really forward, and that was a quantum leap for me. I thought it was precursed by the E32 7 Series, which was a massive leap forward, and then the 3 Series was able to use some of that massive leap to move itself forward and bring new technologies to the 3 Series.
Gotcha. So it's going to trickle down quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then, the E46, more of an evolution on the E36. And then we saw another jump from E46.
A little bit more conservative. Yeah.
So then we went from E46 to E90. But when it comes to, I guess design-wise, we can all see this. But what do you think was the biggest jump when it comes to technology, engineering, driving dynamics maybe?
Typically at BMW, the engineering gets done with the larger cars. So the 7 Series, for example, is usually the the harbinger of future technologies, right? That's the one where you can amortize the cost of massive changes in level of technology. The 3 Series is built to a price, to be quite honest. And so a lot of those technologies won't make it in right away. It needs to be made less expensive before it gets into the 3 Series. So I don't see the 3 Series being a leader in technology until maybe the Neue Klasse, actually. So, and we'll talk about that later. Yeah, but I think when it comes to technology in the 3 Series, I think the more performance-oriented ones, like the M3s as an example, are the ones that have the pinnacle of the technology. And it may be engine technology. It's typically not, HMI or human-machine interface type things. It's performance engineering.
Gotcha. And Sean, question for you, because you see a lot of customers coming through here with 3 Series. What do you think is the most popular 3 Series that you see coming through your shop?
E46.
E46.
For sure, especially the M3. The S54, Tom was talking about the technology. S54 at the time, I believe, made the highest horsepower per liter of any production engine when it was released. And that was a pretty big deal at the time. And from an engineering standpoint, for that motor to be, the high compression that it is, and to make the power that it is really pushing forward BMW M at the time. And it was a leap from the S52 and then the B32 engine from Europe. The S54 came over, but it also carries forward into the E90 generation after E46 with the S65 that Tom and I were talking about. That's a 12-to-1 compression V8 engine, which was unheard of from that standpoint. You would only hear about those engines with that type of compression.
That's race engines.
In Ferrari or at the racetrack. When BMW decided we're going to put that in an M3, and then they're going to put the V10 in the M5, that's a huge technology leap from them on the mechanical side. But back to your question, I mean, E46s are very, very popular. We do a ton of mechanical restoration on the M3 platform, and really it's actually started to move over into the ZHP and the 330 platform, which at the time, ZHP, there was not an M3 sedan in the E46 generation. It was only an E36. And when BMW made that choice, the ZHP was a popular model then, but a lot of people are buying those sedans. I have a couple of them personally, and I absolutely love that chassis with the manual transmission, even with that N54 engine. It's just a great car, and it really shows the evolution of the 3 Series, but it also shows what a great chassis that is even today. I mean, you put somebody that's never been in an E46, M3, or a ZHP, and you put them in today that loves cars, they are going to love that car.
Yeah. I was going to let you take the next question, but I'll jump in and then you can ask the next one.
Okay.
Why do you think the 3 Series has remained so successful over 5 decades, Tom?
It's really what BMW was built on in the US. And just talking about E46 M3, I think the M3s have put a halo on that car that makes all of them that much more desirable. If we talk about E46 M3, that was, until fairly recently, that was the most popular, or the biggest seller in North America that we've had. That was about 47,000 units over life cycle, which E92, there are 28,000 in US. Part of that is it's not due to the car, it's part of it is it was launched right in the worst recession that we've ever had in this country. So it had a tough go in sales-wise at the beginning, and then at the end of its life cycle, it did much better. I think that the 3 Series now, I have to say, within BMW North America's portfolio, the 3 Series is not as important as it was back in the 30, 36, and E46 era. At that time, the 3 Series accounted for anywhere between 60 to 65% of the sales. Wow. Since the X5 was launched, and then subsequently the X3, those numbers have gone down. And right now, between X5 and X3, and some of the other X models, Total X, I feel like, we're about 65% X models now. So 3 Series is more of a niche vehicle. It's still a big seller and still worthwhile for us, and still the core of our brand.
Yeah.
Tom, what do you think is the most underrated generation of 3 Series, and which one do you think maybe is perhaps the most overrated generation?
I don't know about. Okay, I'll answer the overrated first. I don't think there are any overrated because time is good at placing things in context and making sure that the cars are loved for what they really are. I would say for me personally, I think the E30 M3 is a little overhyped. I had one as a company car when I started with the company, and I loved the look, I loved the steering, I loved the handling, but that engine was tough to live with on a day-to-day basis, and it was a daily, so that's different. If you're taking it to the track, that's fine, but as a daily, it was tough. I drove a 2.5 liter an Evo later on, and that's way better for our type of driving. But I remember there was one hill on the 401 that in Toronto that you had to gear down 2 gears to get up the hill and maintain your speed. Yeah. And the thing was buzzing at 6,000 RPM to get up the hill, and that's not fun. No. So I couldn't wait to get into a 325 IS again, I have to say. So for me personally, an E30 M3 is not on my list unless it's a DTM race car like we have on the table here.
Of course, I 100% agree. I mean, I had an E30 M3. I got an E30 M3 in 1999, and I loved the look. I loved the car. I loved the look. Loved the size. But the engine, for me, again, this is my personal opinion. It's a great engine on paper. It's a great engine to see, but to drive it normally, the torque is not there, and you have to do a lot of work, and the work is fine with me. Like in my O2s, you have to do a lot of work with an M10 that makes 90 horsepower. But I ended up actually engine swapping my E30 M3, and we put an S52 in the car.
Which would be perfect.
It is, and it makes 240 horsepower. It has the torque that you need, and it makes the car. And the cool thing about that swap in an E30 is that it's not an overpowered engine, right. And you could give the car to people that don't know which engine belongs, which one looks. It looks factory, but it drives amazing. And people would take that car and be like, I love this car. How do I get one? I said, well, this is not as advertised. Yeah. This is not what they were. And it really made the car. And I will say a lot of customers come to me and they want to buy an E30 M3 because they love the look. They love the history that car has, especially in motorsport. And I always tell them, if you're going to go buy it, you need to go drive it
first. Yeah. Because
you're going to know within 30 minutes if it's for you. And I've had a lot of customers not do that. Get the car, we'll do some maintenance on it, and then in 6 months they come in and they have something different. I'm like, what's going on with the E30? And I just couldn't live with the car.
Interesting.
And that's just a part of it. It's a part of that engine, and that was a race engine in a street car, which we talked about before.
And that car was built for a specific reason. And it was a homologation special, which means 5,000 had to be built in order to go racing in DTM in Europe and be able to qualify for various other classes. So it was built to a set of rules for racing. So the 4-cylinder was on purpose. The rake of the rear window was in order to prove the aerodynamics on the 3 Series. The wing had to be there so that they could use it for racing as well. And as a street car, it wasn't ideal. And it's the same with the CSLs that were used for homologation earlier in the 70s. Homologation cars typically are not your best dailies.
No.
Right. So, but it's an absolutely wonderful car. And I think if you have a great collection of BMWs, you have to have an E30 M3. Yeah.
And underrated?
Underrated, I would say probably E92.
Okay.
Yeah, E92 M3.
Okay, you own one, so tell me why.
I own one, yes, exactly.
You're trying to hype it up too, so
trying to get the values up. That's me. No, I think E92. I think some people said it was too large. I don't find it is, not in today's context anyway. The V8 is amazing. There's nothing like that engine, and it has sufficient performance in today's world if you keep it stock, but you can also modify it if that's your thing. It is the carbon fiber roof, manual transmission. On mine, at least, was possible. The DCT transmission worked incredibly well. Most of them are built that way. So if you don't want to shift yourself, you don't need to, and there's no compromise. It's actually, honestly, it's slightly better with the MDCT transmission. Hydraulic steering. You know, and
I mean, it's with every, you know, I agree. I think the E92, I think an E92 in specific is underrated. There's a lot of people buying those and paying a lot of money for special editions of that car. But at the time, I'll never forget, on the forums and in the meets and everything, everyone was upset that the M3 was getting a V8.
Right.
That was a big, like,
Why?
oh, you know, I can't believe it. BMW, and it's funny that happens every time. You know, it happened with the F chassis cars with the turbo engine.
Right.
People were I remember customers were telling me, I'm never selling my E92 because now everything is ruined with the turbo with the turbo engine.
Yeah.
And they would tell me, well, all my values of my E92 is going to go through the roof because no one's going to buy the turbo. And I would always tell them, like, look, you have to trust BMW. Like, if you look at BMW's history and what they've done, you have to just, and I always have, obviously I have a shop, I love BMW, but I've always trusted, and even with, and it's happened every model, even the G80. I remember when the leak happened at the factory and that was posted, and I will never forget. People were telling me they're going to sell their BMW collection. And my comment to Dan, I told Dan, I said, hey, we're going to get the car. I'm going to get it the day it's released because it's going to be an amazing car. And it is. And I think it's been successful for BMW.
Oh, it's been absolutely successful. Yeah.
And I think that proves that BMW a lot of times have been ahead of the game with technology, but also with design. People didn't even understand the design. What are they doing? And now you look back at some of those older cars, like Tom said, every generation fits within its place. And when you look back and you see that, everything fits together like in pieces.
So if you look at the car closely, one of the designers, or the head of design for M at the time, said, look at the front of the car. It's meant to evoke the engine nacelle of a jet engine. So they've changed the way the grille is inset on the outside. There's no trim ring around the outside of the opening of the kidney grille, and then you have those two little indents above it that look like exits, air exits. And it really was looking for a fighter jet air inlet for the engine. Yeah. So now that you know that, you'll look at it a little bit different.
Yeah.
My daily for quite some time now has been either a G80 or a G82. I love the thing. I think they're fantastic cars.
Yeah, and I think the leap, we were talking about the leaps of generations. When you get out of an F chassis, M3, and you get into a G, it's like 40 years have occurred in between the cars. And that's not something negative on the F. You just feel that way. And I've owned all the generations of them when they were new cars. I mean, every first year I had. And when I got the G80, I was blown away with the quality of the interior, the way the technology integrate. Everything was just so much better than before. And I think that's why they're selling the G80s. People ask me all the time, I want a daily that's fast and quick, that has I can get on my phone. I said, go buy an M3. Go buy an M3. Go buy it, and people love the car. They bring them in and say, I love this car.
Right. And then if you get the driver aids package, it's almost self-drives if you need it to, or you can take it to the track. My favorite is to have the carbon ceramic brakes on the car.
Oh, yeah.
All-wheel drive is actually better than the two-wheel drive, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it's an absolutely fantastic car. I love it.
Well, gentlemen, let me put a pin on the M3 stuff, because this is what happens when you talk to gearheads. You shift it from a 3 Series to let's talk about racing and M3s and all of that. So we will get back to that. I promise we will. Let's reel back a little bit into the 3 Series and tell me some interesting stories that you might have, like personal stories of yourself with the 3 Series, but also maybe some owner story that you've heard. I mean, you attended so many meets and so many events over the years. We've known each other for quite some time, and even before that in your role. Any personal anecdotes that you could share about the 3 Series or stories that you've heard? Even your own, maybe. I mean, you already shared the E30 a little bit.
I'll share one story because I think some of the fans will have a chance to see the results of this story. So back in, I think it was 89, 90, somewhere around there, one of our employees at BMW Canada did an event at Motorsport, and when the car came back on Monday, it came back on the back of a flatbed, and it had been rolled several times. So it was pretty beat. And I was the head of I was technical manager at BMW Canada at the time, and which included managing the shop, the national workshop. So anyway, the car comes in, and it had one of those M Technic 2 steering wheels in it, because we didn't have airbags in Canada as soon as you guys did here, and it was in perfect shape. So after the insurance guys decided it was time to scrap the car, I said, "Can I take the steering wheel out?" And they went, "Yeah, sure." So I swapped that steering wheel into each of my cars, because I really didn't like the M Technic 1 steering wheel. It just didn't work for me. So my M Technic 2 steering wheel continued to swap cars until airbags came, which is probably 2-3 years down the road. Mm-hmm. And then it went in my display case for years and years and years. And then Jason Camisa said, "I'm really looking for an M Technic 2 steering wheel without the little airbag in it." And I went, "I know someone who has one of those." And so I gifted it to Jason.
Nice.
Yeah, and it's in his E30 wagon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
So if you ever see pictures of the interior of his E30 wagon, that's where that steering wheel came from.
Yeah, so that's a good topic for the podcast with Jason. Which, by the way, is being planned, but we had to reschedule it. But that's a good one. How did he get that steering wheel? Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, that's a good one. All right,
So
Sean,
I guess, we're on the 3 Series, the non-M topic now. How would you say the new Neue Classic cars fit with all the series coming up?
I think, that's a good question. And there's not so much I can talk about yet, but we've had a couple of vision vehicles that have come out. Adrian van Hooydonk, who's the head of design for BMW, has said that these are pretty indicative of what is coming. The Neue Klasse sedan is not the first one to come. So the Neue Klasse X vision vehicle is the precursor of the first vehicle that will come on this Neue Klasse architecture. So maybe we should explain a little bit what we mean by Neue Klasse, right?
Yeah. So I guess it's still a little confusing for people, but I guess we can explain based on what I know, and we don't have to confirm too much. But I guess
you have a historian here too, so you know.
Yeah. But I guess there is Neue Klasse, but there's going to be also another generation of 3 Series Ice, which is kind of based on Neue Klasse things, right? So what they're talking about is they're going to share some design traits, especially when it comes to the design, not to the technology. But I guess we'll have Neue Klasse, but then you'll have a G50 3 Series Neue Klasse also.
Okay.
So that's
maybe I can clear some of that up.
Okay.
So, so the name Neue Klasse was used in the 60s, right after BMW was almost bankrupt and bought out by Mercedes-Benz. The Quant family purchased a controlling stake in BMW and invested some money to develop a new platform of cars, if you want. And that eventually became the 2002. It was a 1600 and 1800 and 1500 and all those that weren't hugely big sellers in the U.S. There was really not much of a market here in the U.S. at the time for those. But the 2002 is the one that we know. So those were all Neue Klasse, and they all shared essentially the same underpinnings, same engines. They were all developments of each other. The suspension was the same, and so on. They might be slightly different components to deal with different weights and different lengths and all that kind of thing.
But I'll add in too that what a lot of people need to understand with the Neue Classic cars from the 60s is that it was a difference from the 50s. If anyone's seen BMWs from the 50s, they resemble big body
Pre-war
1940s cars from the U.S.
Right.
So if people haven't seen 503s or seen those cars, just imagine 1940s Fords and things of that nature. Big fenders, big body, lazy cars. They're big and heavy. They had V8s.
Right.
But the Neue Classic cars really were sport sedans first with the 1500, and then it went from there.
Exactly.
And there was also a coupe with the 2000 CS. But it was a new way that BMW designed and thought about cars. So to me, I don't know from BMW's point of view, but for me, when they started to use the Neue Klasse, remark with the new 3 Series, it's like a line in the sand. Like these new cars are going to be different from everything that came before, and that's what it means to me.
And that was exactly how we mean it. Yes.
Okay.
So that was a rebirth, if you will, for BMW back in the 60s. And it was the basis, the foundation to get us to where we are today. And it is the feeling of the company that it's time for another big transformation. And the Neue Klasse architecture is this new architecture. And I say architecture rather than platform because it's not just take the body pan and put a different body on it. It is componentry that can be scaled up or down, width, wider, narrower, and make different types of vehicles. The Neue Klasse group of vehicles, and it is a group, are fully electric. They can have one motor, they can have 2 motors, they could have more motors, right? You've seen tests of one car that apparently has more than 2 motors. So
can't really talk about it yet.
Not yet, no, but
yeah, we've seen a teaser actually, so it's kind of
exactly.
Out
So this architecture allows that. Now, what's really critical about the Neue Klasse is, we have electric cars on the road today. Ours are wonderful. There are others from other manufacturers, but they really haven't made the quantum leap that we're about to make with Neue Klasse. So with Neue Klasse, all the control units for the operation of the suspension, the brakes, all that is integrated into one. So now you don't have communications between your ABS control unit and the engine controller. It's all in one unit. So that means you lose latency and everything can be much quicker. So Frank Weber, the head of research and development, has called it the heart of joy. And that's important. This control unit controls everything. So you can regen much more aggressively than you could before, so that when you press on the brake, you think you're putting hydraulic brakes on, but it's heavy regen on potentially up to at maximum 4 motors.
And I mean, to put that into perspective with a module, a car today or a car 3-4 years ago from BMW, some have 80 plus modules, 70 plus modules underneath the carpet that's making everything work. And I mean, one central location, I mean, that seems like a big advancement.
Exactly. So you have one for steering. There's one for ABS and DSC. There's the engine controller in an ICE car. There's an engine controller for up to 4 motors potentially on the electric car. What am I missing? Suspension.
Yeah, there's suspension EDC module. There's a battery module to charge the battery. There's so many modules,
and these now are all integrated, and it's proprietary. It's done by BMW. It's not done by a supplier, so it's in-house. Will be exclusive to this. So, and I will be able to talk pretty soon about what the potential is for this this level of integration. And from what we see from the engineering, it's really will transform the performance aspects of an electric car.
Gotcha. So to end the 3 Series topic, any big celebrations that you have planned for this year?
Yeah, there's quite a few this year. Yes, so we start at Emilia, at the Emilia and Concours, with 50 cars on the Cars and Coffee show field put on by our car clubs. That should be fun because they'll bring at least one of everything. BMW North America will have a display of 7 cars, so all 7 generations. Some will be street, some will be race, so some M3s in there. And so that'll be the first one. Then we should have something in Monterey also for 50 years of 3 Series. There is a worldwide event, I think it's happening in May sometime, where they want people to post around the world of them in their 3 Series. So an interactive social media type of event. And then in Monterey at Legends of the Autobahn, the focus will be on 3 Series. At the Rolex reunion as well, we're looking to have every generation of 3 Series represented that they'll let run, which brings us to 2011 and the E92s. So E21, Zach Brown has a really good E21 turbo. His is entered. We're trying to get Andy Bovensteven to come over here with his E30 M3 with the Michelin livery on it. And then we have an E36 Daytona and Sebring winner. And the E36 won't be there. That's in another exhibit. We'll have our E46 6-cylinder there from 2004, and one of the E92s that we have. In addition, and concurrent to that, we will have an exhibit at the Peterson Museum starting in June that will feature all 7 generations of race car.
Awesome.
So some of those are actually M4s because we don't race 3s anymore, but it should be a really good exhibit. Some very rare cars, and looking forward to being able to share more about that once we've signed everything and got all the cars we think we're going to get.
Quite a bit. All right, so now let's jump into your favorite topic, the M3. So maybe, Sean, you start with this one since you guys love talking about the M3s. You had a question on that.
Yeah, so I mean, it's 40 years of the M3.
Well, technically it's next year, right? So I guess it was shown in 40 years ago, but it went into production the year after. I guess it was shown in Frankfurt.
Yes.
I guess 85.
But I think production
86.
started before the end of the year.
Okay. So it's technically considered 4 years this year, or will it be?
I think we're celebrating this year.
Yeah, gotcha.
That's my understanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we kind of brushed this. I'll go with the question that we have. I mean, E30 M3 is a motorsport legend. What do you think made it such a perfect race car at the time? We kind of broached that subject, but also, we also kind of talked about the road car. So maybe
I guess this goes back to, you and I talked about this, on camera quite a few times, about this technology transfer from the track to the road to the track.
Right.
And I guess, did that start really with the E30 M3?
I would say it did, yeah. Again, the street car was an homologation special, so it was designed to be able to take these components racing, and the components were definitely designed first of all for racing, not the street. The car was incredibly successful. To this day, it remains the most successful racing saloon car in the world. So it was able to be developed over a period of years and remained super competitive in the highest form of motorsport in Europe, which was sedan motorsport, which was DTM, Deutsche Touring Car, Touring Masters. The car is a legend that way, and if you're lucky enough to own one, good on you.
Keep it.
Exactly. And if you're lucky enough to own one of the race cars, good on you even more. And I hope you're enjoying it on the track as much as you can, because they are I've unfortunately never had a chance to drive one of the race cars on track. We have one in our collection, but it's a non-runner, unfortunately. But I can just imagine it's a wonderful car.
Yeah, and they made so many renditions, different series cars, different. DTM had different changes. There's different wings, different engines. There's so many. I try to collect the models of all the, and we have 2 on the table, but there's so many differences in them. And if you really know the car and you really search it, there's a lot of different iterations of the cars.
Absolutely.
Over many years, which cars don't really get that type of time. Race cars don't really get that type of time anymore. There's a couple years, 4 years, maybe there's 2 editions. There's an Evo that you guys just did with the new GT3 and the GT4, but it's just neat to see. And every time I go to an event like Goodwood, where we were last year, I see a different one that I didn't know about with the livery and everything. So it's really neat in that way, I think, the E30. So
how has the M3 evolved over the decades while staying true to its motorsport roots?
In some respects, it changed its mission over time. So the first one, homologation special, as we said. The second one really wasn't. It was designed as a road car. And we can talk about the U.S. version, but at the time I was head of product planning in Canada, and we brought in the European motor version. And that engine was able to be developed with its double Vanos So the heads are essentially the same as the McLaren F1, and the Vanos is very similar as well. So doing that project helped make the M3 more successful. And then the E36, people wanted more torque, be it in Europe or here. Inline 6 gives you more torque. It's smoother. Technology had advanced, and then with this incredible head that was on it, the car was spectacular. But its mission was more street-based. We did take it racing, and we were very successful with it, but it was designed first as a street car.
I think it made the comments we had earlier in the podcast about the E30 M3 not being a daily drivable vehicle because it was so race motorsport focused. If you put yourself in the shoes maybe of what they were trying to do with the E36 M3,
right,
all of the complaints or the things that Tom and I said about the E30 M3 were fixed.
Were fixed, yeah.
Like 100% fixed in E36, which I think is what made more people buy it, what made it more popular. You saw it more. And to me, like when I was, I'm 40 now, but at the time when the E36 M3 was out, that was the car that I would always see. And I always wanted that car, like for me, from a design perspective, because it had its differences, but it also looked like a normal 3 Series, and it's very subtle. The E30 M3 is not subtle,
no,
in comparison to the standard, E30 platform.
It's quite boy racer, yeah.
And the E36 was a lot more subtle, and I think that was also in response to the E30 M3 maybe not doing as well sales wise.
It was a different management group, different design group at the time. So, and I think the board goes through periods of being willing to be more aggressive, and then times when they want to be a little bit less aggressive. So
sure,
the E36, was a little bit less boy racer than the E30 had been. But I think we need to talk about the differences between the U.S. car and the European car. That's a podcast on its own, I think, because
it is.
It's quite a long story. But here in the U.S., you had a car, and I say you because at the time I was in Canada. We were asked, do we want the M3? And there was only one. So we said, yes, we'll take it in Canada. And the U.S. had said originally no.
Interesting.
They didn't want it. Then there was a letter writing campaign from the BMW Car Club. Bob Bromer was the Herd on the Strasse guy. He was the spy info guy that you replaced on ratio. But it's absolutely true. But Rondell was where you got your what's coming next from BMW from Bob Bromer. And Bob Bromer had talked to Karl-Heinz Kopfel, who was the head of M at the time, at the Detroit Auto Show, I believe it was in 2002, I think. Yeah, it was 2002. And he was like, the U.S. doesn't really want the car. And he wrote a column and said, hey, if you want the car, it's time to step up and tell them you want the car. So they did. But what they also said is they wanted a certain price. And the European car would have been quite a bit more expensive. That engine was not an expensive engine to build. And so the U.S., with its might, decided to say, we want an M3, but we want it with a less expensive but just as powerful engine. And they managed to prevail on that, much to my chagrin. But but I think in the retrospect, building an M3 to a certain price and offering it as a coupe, a sedan, and a convertible, ultimately, and an automatic as well, broadened the market for M products in the U.S. and gave the E46 M3 the chance that it probably wouldn't have had we just had a very niche group of the European engined cars in the market.
Yeah, and it was a big jump. I mean, E46 power, I believe, was 333 when it launched, and that was up from 240 from the U.S. E36 model. But if you were in Europe, I believe it was 321 in the E36 outgoing model and the Evo model, only to 343. So that there was people, obviously
it
they
was
had
a
to make
smaller
more.
jump. Yeah.
Well, speaking of petitions, how come the G81 M3 touring petition didn't go through?
Boy.
If we're talking about US and Europe, maybe we talk about this a little bit too.
We did talk about this at one point, yeah. All right, well, the background there is that tourings have not done typically very well in the US market. We've had them in the market before, and at a certain point, the sales were dropping and dropping. And we were given tasks to reduce the number of variants, because every variant, every model of car you bring into the US has to be homologated to be sold, certified, all that. And there's and have parts for it. So there's cost to having every different model in the country. And if you're selling 200 cars, is it worthwhile doing anymore? And the wagon was one of the cars that we said, okay, well, we don't need it. We have strong X3 products coming. There's the X1 coming, and X5 is always strong. So, okay, that's when we can cut. And I was in those meetings, and there's no defending it. I mean, the numbers just didn't add up. And Munich came back to us and said, okay, well, if you say you don't want the touring, we will optimize the body structure for European crash test standards, and it probably won't hit US standards, because in the US there are certain standards, and then there are certain you should also meet because publicly it's seen. So IHS standards, for example, which are very difficult to hit, as well as hitting the normal worldwide crash standards. So we said, yeah, we don't need the car. At that point in time, it was just a number code. There was no, it was an F code. At the time, there was no M3 even being thought about. And I doubt that it really would have made a difference at that point, because this was several years before the M3 touring was released. And then, at that point, the ship had sailed. And when the M3 touring was announced, there was a group that studied whether it was feasible to do, and it just wasn't feasible to do for what people would pay for it. And so no M3 touring. But you have the M5 touring.
That is true.
So, I get a different price point, different kind of car, but we decided, okay, well, we couldn't do it with that car, but we know early enough we can do it with the M5.
Yeah, and that petition is going to get a new life next week, or by the time this podcast goes live, because they're going to see a CS version of it. So they're going to be like, why?
But I think to go back, I also think that I don't think the M3. You would know better, Tom, but I don't think the M3 touring was ever decided on until the M3s were doing so well, and then they decided maybe to make that. And it was sort of, instead of it being in the planning from BMW, which is what some other conversations we had with some people, because it wasn't in the long-term plan, it could easily be done because of the standard 3 Series tourings being available in Europe, so they could adapt different things to make that work, while over here we have zero. Yeah. In fact, F31, I believe, is the last 3 Series touring that was here, and those were 328s. We don't see tourings at all. And I'll just add one thing. When the E61 M5 was released, I know we're on 3 Series, but I have to mention this because we're on touring. I was on the petition there was one on M5 board. There was a bunch of people that wanted the E61 M5 touring. Right. And there was belief, because of what had happened with E30 from the past, that if enough people were there, they would bring the car over. And it was a similar response, because they knew they weren't going to sell. Maybe a deposit would make that work. That did not happen, as everyone knows. And it didn't. It's not going to happen with the G81, but that's why I jumped on and got the M5 touring, because I want to have a touring, but also for the M5 perspective, it really, I want them to do well, and I think they will do pretty well with those.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on from that one, because it's
the controversial topic.
Not just that, but you can talk about that. I guess to really put a pin in that is the fact that I guess no one anticipated the demand for the M3 touring. I guess that's pretty fair to say.
I would say I'm going to be a bit of a skeptic. There are some people that love tourings, and I've had several BMW tourings in my company cars over the years, but we've never done very well with tourings in this market. And there's always a faction that says, I want a touring, but when you do it, they don't step up. And I've stood in front of a crowd of 500 people at BMW Car Club events, and they say, "Well, we want the touring." It's like, guys, we've had this touring for years, and we sell like 500 of them in a year. That means everyone in this room are the people buying them. Oh, how does this? And I've said to them, they say the dealers don't have them in stocks. That's why we don't sell them. No, you can order a car, right? You know that. Yeah. So you order the car, you order the spec you want, and you have to buy it new, because if you wait for it to be used, you're not helping here, right?
Yeah, but I think there's certain models that strengthen certain brands. Like, and I'll talk about GT models, for example, which we have a lot of GTs that we service, 3 Series GTs, 6 Series and 5 Series GTs. And those customers that have a GT love the cars to death, and they will maintain and service them like crazy. And I never see those models ever driving. I mean, those are probably some of the rarest cars that we work on at the shop, to be honest. But every person is the same. Every person that's bringing us those cars wants to keep them on the road because they love that. And I feel like that's the touring guys too. You're right. I think a lot of people want to talk, but when it comes time to buy and it comes time to choose, they don't choose it. They choose the X3M. True. They don't choose the G81 if it was there. But I think it for the enthusiast, like Porsche, to bring Porsche up, they have the Taycan wagon and some other wagons that I know don't probably do well. But the fact that they offer them and to those enthusiasts, I think helps strengthen the brand. So I think there is some argument with that. And I think the M5 will do that. I think that is I think it's a better car as a 5 Series, a touring.
I will say it is a little bit easier to do at a higher price point. So Taycan Cross, I can't remember the name.
Yeah, Cross Turismo.
I think
Cross
so.
Turismo, something like that. Yeah, it's an expensive car. And,
it is.
And so at the price point of an M5 Touring and that, it's a little bit easier to do. You can amortize the cost of certification and all that, or development and certification over a smaller group of cars, and still make some money at the end.
Gotcha.
For us, it's about the business case, unfortunately, and every car, every model that's brought in is looked at from a cost benefit, and it just didn't pencil, and ultimately it didn't pencil for the GTs either. So, what can you do?
Yeah, exactly. I'll let you take the next one because we're talking about special M3s. I know you had a question on that.
Yeah, my question is Tom, do you have a favorite special edition of the M3s? Like maybe it's the Sport Evo, or maybe the E36 GT, or even CSL or GTS, or
maybe even limited edition ones. Doesn't have, like the Lime Rock one, for example, doesn't have to be always a CS or CSL, right? I guess.
Right. For me, the E36 M3 GT was a very cool car. It's not one that we got here in the US. We got some of the components from it in the lightweight, the aluminum doors and the wing and a few other things. But it was a really nice, more torquey version of the E36 M3 engine. And I got a chance to drive the one that's in the collection in Munich a few years back, and it was a revelation. It was a beautiful car. I really like that one. For U.S. model cars, I would say the Lime Rock is probably the pinnacle.
So nice.
So a little bit of a story on the Lime Rock. The original idea was it would be Valencia Orange.
Oh no!
Yeah, and actually, if you there's a guy online. I don't know where he gets the data, but he seems to have all the data for all the colors that were built in that car. And there's one car in Valencia Orange. We have that car.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you can thank the lawyers for this, but seeing as you have a Valencia Orange 1M, when we announced the 1M, we said it was an exclusive color for the 1M, and we were looking for ways to help the E92 M3 recover after the massive recession in 2008, 2009. So an idea was to do this Lime Rock car. At the time, it didn't have a name, but so they built one in Valencia Orange and brought it in and showed it to the execs and to the product circle and everything. And Matt Russell was the M brand manager at the time, and it looked like a good plan. They were going to put some BMW M performance accessories on it and dress it up a little bit and offer it for a good price. but then the lawyers went, no, you said it was an exclusive color to 1M, so you've got to find another color. And we went back and forth, and I know Matt and I talked about it, and I've always been a fan of fire orange. I was like, fire orange, do fire orange. And he's like, So anyway, eventually they decided to do fire orange. They flex painted one of the Valencia Orange car, and put all the accessories on it and presented it to the board. And they went, orange, I don't know, but okay, if you think it's going to work. And sure enough, it worked, right? Yeah. It was, and funnily, in the press at the time, they were like, $10,000 more for some carbon bits and a steering wheel and an exhaust. That seems like a lot, but they sold out very quickly, and they are probably the pinnacle of the E92 M3s at the moment in terms of value.
And I think a couple of years ago when we were in Spartanburg, they had the car that they painted because they had the engine bay open.
Yes,
and
you saw that. Yes, we call that the name for the car is the proof of concept car. It's Lime Rock 00, right? There are 200 for the sale, and that's car 00. It's a production car, and it has the signature of Bill Oberlin on the rear quarter window. But yeah, that's a permanent part of our collection.
But the engine bay is Valencia.
Yeah, and inside the door sills too.
I didn't see that, but I saw it in the engine bay. And the funny story for me, I mean, the personal tie for me with Fire Orange is in 2011, I ordered an E92, and for me, color makes the car. And I ordered, and I worked with BMW for 10 months to get an individual Fire Orange E92. Oh, wow. And I had one that was before the Lime Rock, but it was after the GTS. And I told my dealer, I said, I want the E92 M3, and it needs to be a stripper. I want the screen, but I want manual seats, but I want it to be Fire Orange. I said, every time a car goes into production, ask for it. And they declined it for like 9 months, and finally they did it. And they did it. And the reason that I did that was because of the GTS, but it was also because when I looked at the catalog of colors for E92 M3, it was a lot of blacks, a lot of blues, and a lot of silvers. And there was one bright color, Melbourne Red, which is a great color, which I never see.
That's what you have on your.
That's what I have. Yeah,
Melbourne's a great color. And then
it's a good thing you said that.
And I didn't know that. I didn't know that actually, to be honest.
You're really trying to hype up that car, Tom.
But
he was about to diss Melbourne Red, I think.
But it was funny, and I think Tom would know if we had a catalog here.
It was all grays.
It was all grays, and I knew by seeing the GTS. And anyway, long story short is the colors make the car, and that's what I wanted. And it's just funny that I wanted that color, and I believe that the reason the Lime Rock was popular is because the orange just does so much on the E92.
It really does,
design. And I think if those cars were another gray or a frozen or what, I don't think they would have sold as many and done so well. And it stays popular because it also has the tie-in. That's the color that the GTS had.
Right.
And the GTS, I think there's only 136 or something.
Not sure how many they made. They're only sold in Europe.
125, I thought.
I don't know.
I don't remember. It was somewhere around that area,
So that's my personal kind of thing.
Speaking of colors, then they took Valencia Orange and they put it on the X1.
Yeah, a year later. Yeah,
I was crying the first time I saw that X1 in Valencia Orange. Like, why?
The lawyers figured that there was enough of a distance at that point that they could. Yeah,
it looked good on the X1. I had a technician that had that car, and
color
it
looks
looked great.
You know, it's just the fact that I was like, I got the orange because it was exclusive. Otherwise, I probably got the Alpine White on the 1M probably.
So speaking of 1Ms, we'll go off track a little bit, but the 1M that we have in the BMW USA collection is Valencia Orange, but if you open the hood, it's white. So that car came over. It was a pre-production car, so it came over white, and we wanted it in the positioning color, which was Valencia. So Matt Russell was still the head of M at the time, and he was going to drive it to Daytona and do social media along the way. It was the early times of social media. So they painted it Valencia literally days before he went on this road trip and it's exactly this time of year, he drove from New Jersey down to Daytona. And people got to see it along the way. It was the first time people had seen it in real life. So he had people following him on the highway and, participating in the social media experiment. The car got to Daytona, and there was a lot of fog that year. So it became the pace car just by IMSA said, "That's a good-looking car. Can we use it as a pace car?" And we went, "Yep, here you go." Now it's much more regimented. You have to plan this advance, but back in those days, you could. And so they used it as a pace car, and because it was foggy for about 3 hours, and they paced the race for 3 hours, it was on TV for 3 hours.
Great.
So it was good for the car, and then from there it went to Car and Driver, and was the cover car for Car and Driver magazine. And I remember telling the editor of Car and Driver, it's like, yes, we're not supposed to give you a pre-production car. And they said, but it'll be on the cover. So, and it has to be now. And we went, okay, fine. Don't take any photos under the hood. They took a photo under the hood, published it in a magazine, and you would not believe the shit I got in for that. It was really bad. I thought this could be the end. But we still have the car. I'm still here, and
those have a resurgence for sure. We're getting them in. People want to buy them. They're asking about the car, and when that's here at the shop, we have Horacio's car here. People just love that car. It is probably the number one talked about car, even for people that don't really know what the car is. They see it and they see the color and they see the car. And I can remember when those were new. They were an awkward car for M people. I remember E92 customers were like, I got all these calls for the 1M, and it has that N54 engine from the 335. And what's BMW doing? It's another one of those. What are they doing? And again, this is another car that like BMW knew what they were doing. And when they built it with the suspension, with everything from the M3, with that engine, it's one of the best. I would say it's one of the best modern M cars that you can get from a balance perspective, and it really lines up to make the M2s, and which wasn't made at the time. People forget that the M2 was after.
So I'm gonna keep this short because you mentioned the social media and all of that. So I'm gonna share this personal story. I might have told it before, but if I haven't, I'm gonna tell you now. So everybody wanted to see the 1M on the road. We've always seen these previews a little bit over the lift off.
Right.
It was kind of like annoying for months. He would lift up the cover from the.
That's right. It had a drivable cover with zippered areas that you could remove. Yep.
So at the time, I just started the blog, I guess, early days, and I was still working my corporate job, and I was on a project in Delaware. Okay. And I landed in Philadelphia. I picked up my rental car, whatever that car was. It wasn't great. And I started driving, going towards Delaware. I don't remember the day. It was early morning. And then I see this car coming, an orange car. I'm looking like, is that a 1M? Like, how could that be a 1M? So what are the odds that I see the 1M Matt driving from New Jersey to Daytona at that time? And I was passing by the car. And I was the first one to take photos of that car and post them on social media.
That's so cool.
And I still have photos in my phone right now with Matt waving at me. And then I called Matt and then I said, slow down so I can take different shots, basically. And that was the first time. It was not planned. It was one of those things that just purely happened. I mean, what are the odds? You know? So that's the story that I have with Matt and that car. But anyway.
It's a cool story.
We still have the car.
Yeah. We actually drove it 2 years ago. We went to, with one of our colleagues, Jeff, we went to the Performance Center and we did the 1M that you have. We did the M2CS and a few other generations. So it still runs great. Even the interior, it's got some prototype bits in it.
It does, yeah. It's not a full level. If I remember correctly, it has the wrong climate control system in it.
Yeah, because I went in, I'm like, that's not a...
That's not.
So that's when I realized that's what it was. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about the M3 generation. So as the head of BMW Classic USA, which M3 you consider them to be classics today, and how do you consider BMWs to be classics? When do you make that determination that this car is a classic today and we're going to bring it to Villa d'Este or Pebble Beach and so on and so forth?
We would consider a car a classic once it's 15 years old.
15 years old.
So in Europe, they call them young timers. Here, we just have one designation. It's more of a parts availability designation. So after 15 years, the parts that you buy through your dealer actually help fund BMW Group Classic. Okay. So a percentage of the proceeds go to them. And that's how we fund maintaining a collection worldwide and so on. I think the market decides if the car is an icon more than just a classic, if it's something really special. Mm-hmm. And I think every M3 fits that bill. Even if it's just outside of the daily driver realm. So F8X at this point, I think, are becoming sought after. You know, they'll go through a dip through the third owner maybe, and then the enthusiasts can afford them maybe, or a new generation of enthusiasts can afford them, and then they start building them back up again. So I think every car goes through that. The E92, I think, is going through that as well. It's on the other end of it. E46 values are really high now. So, you know, the ones that have survived and haven't been crashed or damaged are worth a fair bit of money. So I think every M3 and M4 is destined to become a classic.
Gotcha. Have you seen any interesting classic restorations on M3s? Any project that stands out?
Not really, no. A lot of the really good ones have been maintained and maintained in original condition. The ones that get restored are the race cars, because they go through hell in their lifetime. And then afterwards, they have high value so that people will restore them. Occasionally in Europe, we'll get a customer approach BMW Group Classic and say, I want my 3 Series restored because it has sentimental value to me. And, you know, a restoration through Group Classic is a very expensive proposition. So it doesn't pencil in terms of spending the money versus the value of the car, but people want their car back to the way it was when it was new. So,
yeah. So speaking of that, can I just pick it back for 1 second and I'll let you take the question? So, I mean, this wasn't planned, but now just, you know, came to mind. Do you plan on offering a service similar in the US where customers can do restoration on classic cars like they offer in Europe? Will that make sense at some point?
Probably at some point. I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
I think you need to have a certain value of car to be able to make it make sense to spend $100,000-$200,000 on a restoration, which is really what it would cost.
Minimum.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think we're there in terms of the values of the cars.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the one thing I wanted to add about the classic part of it is I think that the market 100%, and I think the market determines which are classics. Some states I think Florida, you know, is 30 years.
30
you
years,
can run
exactly.
The antique plate. But for me, you know, I think that also the people and the age of who liked those cars. I mean, I said at my age, I'm 40. A lot of the cars that we're doing at the shop are E46 M3s, and people are sending me those cars from all over the country and spending more money than I would guess that they would want to spend on doing these cars. And part of it is that was the car that they wanted. That was the car they connected with in that time. And now they've worked, they have a professional career, they're able to buy the car that they wanted, and they're able to make it the way they wanted. And I think that has to do with the cycle of these cars. E46s are hot right now, E92s are growing up and up and up.
Yeah.
And I think that works with that too, to determine that. And I also think some of the shows that people put on, maybe it's Radwood, maybe it's some of the events at Amelia and at Monterey, where they let those cars, I'll remember, I think some of the classic shows now, they're letting E36s in, which was I think for the vintage, I believe, the vintage show, which is up in North Carolina, they just let E36s, which is a big deal because all these guys with E36s now, it's considered a classic. So I think there's many determining factors for that, which is cool because it's unique to the U.S. and it's different in Germany with old timer, young. That always confused me when I would do parts.
Old timer and young timer, yes. Yes.
So for the sake of time, do you still want to talk about the M3s or you want to do something
we can. There's one more point I want to make on M3s, yes. So Rolex Reunion is the premier vintage racing event in the U.S. every year. And they recently made a class that goes up to 2011, which allows us to have most of actually all of the M3s run. And until last year, until last year, it was 1991 was the cutoff. So that eliminated everything except for the E30. Now we can run the newer cars, and we've seen from the fans that they really appreciate seeing an E46 out there, an E36, and even the E92s. So I think the classic world is embracing a newer, younger fan and allowing these cars to be run.
Yeah, I think we'll have to have another episode just on the M3. I feel like there's so many stories that we haven't told today. Really. I mean, we could talk about the M3 forever. I mean, such an iconic car. But let's talk about 50 years of BMW USA because, I don't want to keep you too long here. I know you have to go to Daytona, so that's quite important. But, You've told the story a little bit about Bob Lutz and all of that, but maybe tell me the story of BMW coming to the US and maybe some interesting anecdotes, something that hasn't been told before, or something that's interesting.
The early part of BMW North America is really heavily tied to Bob Lutz.
Okay.
In so many ways. So prior to BMW North America, BMWs were imported by Max Hoffman, Hoffman Motor Corporation, I think it was the official name. And he was independent, and he would bring in the cars that he thought he could sell. He set up a dealer network, excuse me, and he ran the warranty part of it, the service side of it, all of it. And it was pretty loosey-goosey at the time. And sales were quite small, about 6,000 to 8,000 vehicles per year. Bob Lutz came to BMW in Germany and went, these importers, and there were importers around the world. It wasn't just the US. They were making more money selling 20,000 cars or 10,000 cars than BMW was making producing all of the cars. So he said, it's out of whack. We can't continue to do this because we don't have the money to develop new cars. And he convinced Eberhard von Kuhnheim, who was the chairman at the time, that we needed to set up national sales offices around the world. Some of the ones in Europe were fairly easy to do. Max Hoffman put up quite a fight. At first, he tried to bribe Bob, apparently. Bob says he offered him lots of money and said, hey, I don't think they pay you enough. If you work with me, I can make you a rich man. And Bob goes, no, I'm remunerated just fine, thank you. And then he actually gave him a threat. He said, I sell a lot of cars to Italians in New York, and I wouldn't want anything to happen to you. And it's like, are you telling me that? Is that a threat? He's like, no. But so it didn't go down very easily. There were some court battles and so on, and eventually BMW prevailed. BMW AG prevailed, and we took over as the official importer for the U.S. in March 15th, 1975. And Bob Lutz at that point had left the building. He'd gone to Ford after BMW, but what he started got us on the right track. A couple of other things he did, which ties us back to the 3 Series. So prior to the first 3 Series, the E21, BMWs were called by their engine size, right? It was a 2800 CS, it was 3.0 CS, it was a 2002, and Bob had a hard time figuring out what was what, because you could have the same engine in different cars. So our nomenclature was difficult to understand. So his people in the marketing department came up with the idea of doing the 3, 5, and 7. And so that was implemented during Bob Lutz's era. Okay, another tick for him.
Yeah, for sure.
And then he started the BMW Motorsport division because he didn't have a lot of marketing money, and he saw that Porsche was very successful marketing strictly through motorsport. So he thought, okay, well, we need to have a factory motorsport team. So essentially, Bob Lutz started BMW M. And Jochen Nerposch, who is here in Daytona this weekend, was the first manager of BMW Motorsport, which became BMW M and so on.
Mm-hmm. And it's cool. That's a line in the sand. Like you can tell when Bob was there,
yes,
and when he left, because it went from the series started, the series cars.
Yeah,
like you said. I mean, you can tell. You can look in the years and kind of see Bob's. He was there for 3 years, right?
3 years, only 3 years.
It's so crazy.
Yeah,
and he has a lot of secret history with BMW. He has a special CSL that was made with the wide body components that was built for him. That I think Felipe is restoring in Munich, which was a car that he had made as a favor, kind of a thing. You may know more about it, but it's such a funny that he can have such an impact. It's a testament to Bob.
And I'll add one more thing to that, and it's something that it's a few letters or a few words that we'll really know very well. And Bob, when he was getting ready to set up BMW North America, working in the background in New York, hired an ad agency to come up with a new tagline and start developing some ads. And the tagline that was developed was the ultimate driving machine.
That was my next question. You just took my question.
Awesome. See?
Very good.
so you can credit that to Bob Lutz as well, and it stuck with us for the last 50 years.
That's just incredible.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess to piggyback on that a little bit, that was my question. You know, what was the cultural impact of that slogan?
I will say from a couple of angles. One corporately and then one personally. I think the ultimate driving machine in the U.S., as opposed to Freude an Fahren for Germany, we specialized more on the higher performance cars in the U.S. market, the more premium cars and a bit more luxurious, I would say, in the BMW range. So the ultimate driving machine really fits incredibly well for us, and it's true to what you get when you buy the car, right? You're paying more for essentially a smaller car, but what you give up in size, you get performance and just the fun of driving. And so it was a believable slogan at the beginning, and it became more of a mission statement also to our engineers. I'll tell a little story of when I was in product strategy in mid 90s. There was talk of doing an X5 or an SUV. The U.S. market was noticing that BMW customers would have their BMW in the garage, and they would have something like a Ford Explorer or the first Jeep Cherokee in there. And it was like, we're giving up a car in the garage, and we can't keep doing that. So there was a push from the U.S. market to develop an SUV. But how do you develop an SUV that is the ultimate driving machine? And the German engineers that worked on the platform for this car had it in their mind that yes, we need to build a taller vehicle that it has more utility, but it must be the ultimate driving machine. And at the time we owned Land Rover, so you could just rebadge a Land Rover and say, hey, there's your BMW, but we didn't. So it went from being a tagline to being a reason for being. Mm-hmm. And as we enter the Neue Klasse era and the electric era, we've used the tagline of adding the electric, right? The ultimate electric driving machine. And I think it holds true, and it's not just a tagline. It's the way we understand our brand.
And since you spoke about strategy and the X5 and all of that, one other question I had was, how has the U.S. market shaped BMW's product strategy and design over the years? So we know the X5, any other products that have been influenced by the U.S.?
I think it's pretty subtle. In 1994, we bought into a little design company in California called DesignWorks USA. And a few years later, we became the controlling entity for that. So it became BMW DesignWorks in California. Mm-hmm. And California is for many, many years has been the leading edge of auto design, and some other manufacturers have also have design studios there. And the influence of BMW DesignWorks has been phenomenal over that period of time. Some of the things we've talked about publicly that have come from DesignWorks, the X5, the first generation X5, the E53, came from DesignWorks. But so many vehicles have been influenced from that design office there that I think it's subtle in the way it's happened, and the cars look great worldwide. They're not specifically U.S. looking cars, but the influence that we've had from that studio, I think, is immeasurable. I'll give you a little example. The D9X was the design of that was developed based on the Gina concept in a lot of ways, and so was the E70 X5, where the lines were very taut and you could see a ridge line through the bodywork. In fact, there is a photo that was released recently of an E92 model where the designer, I can't remember his name right now, you see the picture of you see the car, and it looks like an E92, slightly different version. And then he pulls up a corner from the wheel well, and you see it's just a skeletal structure underneath with this pulled skin.
That's that's from Steve Sexty's book.
It's from Steve Sexty's book, exactly, and that shows the influence of Gina, the concept vehicle, and Gina was done at DesignWorks. So again, the E92 is not credited to DesignWorks. E46 is though. That was done by I don't remember his name right now.
Eric Gopland.
Right, Eric Gopland, exactly. So, there you have direct influence. On the motorcycle side, there's influence there as well. So, I would say it's not overt. It's design that uses some of the influences from the U.S., but it's not overtly designed for the U.S.
Yeah. Which makes sense. I guess you have to make it a global product, but you have to focus certain products for the U.S. because that's the biggest market for particular models. I guess, yeah. Okay, so 50 years of BMW USA, key milestones. What do you consider to be key milestones for the BMW of North America?
Key milestone, March 15th was when it started. March 21st was the race at Sebring, 12 hours of Sebring. We were racing with CSLs. So 6 days after incorporation, we won at Sebring overall with the CSL. And this March, we're going back 50 years later with GTP cars and a special livery that you'll see at some point. So
awesome.
Yeah. So that's a key milestone.
Sure.
And that Sebring victory was important for us in that the windshield banner said Bavarian Motor Works. A lot of people back in those days thought it stood for British Motor Works. There was a British influence, or there were some British cars available in the U.S. People didn't know who we were, so I thought it was British Motor Works. And so that banner was there specifically to say, no, we're Bavarian Motor Works. And it was an iconic victory. And then that whole season was a strong season for us. And that's what started us off in the market.
And I think the one thing I'll say is when you do, a lot of manufacturers go racing to advertise, but when you go racing and you win, it's like a twofold for those people. It proves everyone sees the car, but then if you win, it proves the car, and I think that's super important.
Yeah.
What was the saying? Or racing on Sunday,
sell on Monday.
Sell on Monday.
Yeah. And then I think the next big point would be the opening of the plant in Spartanburg. Yeah, which is 30 plus years ago now. They celebrated their 30th last year, and it is now the largest production plant within the BMW network. So it's done very, very well. Yeah,
it's reshaped that area of the country.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was an area that was very depressed. It didn't have any money, and we've invested somewhere in the range of $12 billion and employ 11,000 people directly there. So.
Suppliers and all of that.
And then the suppliers on top. Yeah.
I think it sells cars too, because I think when people understand that cars are made and exported from there to the world, that shows that it's not it's not an ad that, there's a plant, they make seats. No, they make full production cars there for the world. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about motorsports when we're getting close to the end, but how has BMW USA supported motorsports and enthusiast culture in America?
Well,
this is your area of expertise, one of them.
One of them, yeah. Motorsport, I think, is important to prove that you're the ultimate driving machine. I think you have to keep showing that you're in it and you believe in it. And at the moment, we have a wider range of motorsport activities than we've had in our history. We used to run one factory team. There might be some privateers that built their own cars back in the day. But now we have a full range of customer race cars that we have for sale. So we're there as a factory team in the top level in GTP, both in Europe and in the US. And then below that, we have the M4 GT3 Evo running with Paul Miller Racing and Turner Motorsport. Shooting for GTD Pro category. And then we also are in the Michelin Endurance Challenge series with the GT4s, the M4 GT4s, with a number of cars running. with Turner Motorsport is one of them, and several
Miller.
teams. Yeah, Paul Miller's not. No, he's not on that one. But there are Bimmer World and a whole bunch of different teams. So I think we show our level of performance not just at the top level, but throughout the grid and throughout the various series. And we also participate in the SRO series with both GT4s and GT3s. Samantha Tan runs the GT3. I know you've had her on a podcast. She's run GT4s for several years as well. And those are homologated GT3 or GT4 race cars that you can purchase and go racing. And you can start with an M2 CS racing and then move up to the GT4, which is, more downforce, more performance, and then you get up to the top level, which is the GT3, and that's a serious race car.
We should give a plug to the Performance Center too, because we had a chance to drive a couple of times the M4 GT4 at that school, and it's a fantastic program.
It's a fantastic program.
I always tell people, if it's not that expensive, honestly, it's such a great gift.
And if you have deeper pockets and you want to pursue this, they'll do private coaching in GT4s for you, which tends to be their biggest part of their business. Learning how to drive one of these cars properly and get competitive with it.
And I think just for one point, I think if Tom, you could explain the difference with a customer race, BMW customer racing versus customer factory team racing, what the main difference is in, because I get a lot of questions about that. I don't race myself, but a lot of people ask me, well, they're all the same cars. They're
Right.
what is really the line between the two when you have that?
Yeah, it's a question of sophistication of the race car. So an M2 CS race car is roughly $150,000 to start, and then you need your spares package and be able to run it and all that. So it's a fairly good low cost of entry. It's very similar to the street car. It has slicks on it, and upgraded brakes and a few other things.
Street motor, I believe.
Street
just
motor,
with little differences.
Exactly. Yeah, some little differences, but it will get you into a series that is very competitive. The car's competitive, and you can hone your skills at car-to-car combat sort of thing, if you like. And it's a very good first step. Now, a GT4. Now you start to have a little bit of downforce. You have more performance. It's more of a race car under the skin than the CS.
A lot more carbon, I think, in the GT4s, but it still is a street-based motor. It's an S-based motor.
Yep,
it's not a P motorsport.
It's
engine.
an S-based motor, and it has the ZF automatic transmission in it as well. You paddle shift it in that car, but it is the automatic, which works incredibly well. And that's another level up. More difficult to drive, faster, and it's a bit more expensive. It's roughly about $300,000 to get into one of those, and then to run it will cost from there. And then a GT3, now you're talking about $500,000 to $700,000 for a GT3 car. That is high downforce. You're generating about 1,500 pounds of downforce at 160 miles an hour.
And there really isn't a body panel that's shared with the street
Not
car.
really,
I think on
no.
the GT3, it looks like the street car.
Yeah, I think the roof panel might be,
Maybe.
but that's about it. The body in white is based on the street car, and then it's tubbed from there, and the roll cage put in Regensburg and so on within our plants. But it's a factory built race car, so it's safe like a factory built race car should be. If you have the money, that's the way to go. It's skill level wise, it takes quite a bit to go from a GT4 to a GT3 level car.
It's going to take a team. It's going to take people to help you just do everything. So it's a big step up.
Yes, it is. The new GT3, the G82 version, is actually quite easy to operate without a large team.
Gotcha.
So that was one of the criteria for the design of this car, was to reduce how much you needed. You don't need to plug into a computer externally. You can use the dash to do everything you want to do there. But in terms of driver skill, it's a big jump from GT4 to GT3. It takes quite a bit to understand the level of what downforce can do for you, how effective the brakes can be. And you won't be immediately competitive when you go from one to the other. We had one of our dealers at one point, who was a good friend, and said, I bought a GT3. I'm looking forward to doing that. And he raced GT4s for a while. And I went, "Well, you're gonna love this, but it's gonna freak you out at first." And he called me one and he went, "Oh my, bleep, 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 bleep," because he was wide-eyed after that. And I remember my first time in a GT LM car, which slightly more difficult because it doesn't have race ABS and it doesn't have any sort of stability control. It's a lot of car.
Yeah.
Not easy to handle. Okay, so to bring it all together for 50 years of BMW of North America, any activities planned for this year? Or let me ask you this, any special cars planned maybe? You used to do these special editions to celebrate, but I haven't heard anything, so I'm assuming it might not be anything. But as far as activities, maybe then.
Activities, it's more internal than it is external.
Okay.
We are working on something we're calling 50 Stories for 50 Years. Jackie Jure and I have been working on those. Jackie's writing them, and I'm
really
editing.
Good. Yeah,
trying to edit her really good
they're
stuff.
really good, yeah.
And so we release one of those every week through the year.
Very cool.
And they'll range in topics throughout the year. Mm-hmm. We have all 50 chapters outlined, so she's plugging through them. We've released 3 at the point we are now. Mm-hmm. They are published on BMWUSAnews.com, so you can go and have a look at them.
Yeah, Jackie's great. I mean, her writing style, and the books about
fantastic.
BMW,
exactly,
are really engaging. So it's perfect person to do it.
You will learn a lot about BMW in North America over the period of this year. In terms of events, not really too much. In terms of special models, we'll see.
Okay.
There are discussions, but nothing fixed yet.
Fair enough. All right, so we're getting really close to the end. So we're gonna start with personal questions right now. So let's just. I mean, they're quite fun actually. So, first BMW you've ever drove or owned?
First BMW I ever drove was a E28 528E. Okay. I was working for Ford as a service rep at the time, and one came into my dealers, and I said, I'd like to drive that because I was driving a Merkur at the time, and I kind of liked it. And so I want to see what these BMW things were like.
Gotcha. If you could own only one BMW Classic for the rest of your life, which one would it be and why?
Oh, man.
Favorite child. You only have one, so that's easy. Anyway.
My E92 M3 in Melbourne red on bamboo with manual carbon roof competition.
Went up.
I recently wrote an article in Rondell. Actually, it came out yesterday but I narrowed it down to 10 and split it over 2 columns. Okay. So I keep choosing one is very difficult. Yeah.
Well, I think the Melbourne, I'll just throw this in. I think the Melbourne on bamboo was the launch.
It was the launch color
and interior and combo, because that was the cars that I was always offered, and everyone's like, "Oh, we got Melbourne on bamboo." All the dealers had them. I just remember that from.
But what would it be the one BMW Classic that you would like to work on, like a dream project, BMW Classic dream project, a restoration? Let's say a restoration, maybe.
I think I've actually had a chance to do it.
Oh, you have?
Yeah,
okay.
It was finding the parts again and rebuilding the E46 M3 GTR with the V8 engine. We rebuilt that in 2015. It took 2 years to build it, so we started in 13. The cars had been converted to 6 cylinders and run in Grand Am for a few years, so we had to go back and find him. This was Matt Russell and I. This was
Is it the American flag car?
It's the American flag car. Yeah, exactly. So we went back and we found the boxes. We talked to the old mechanics who took the cars apart and converted them. And then we had to undevelop the cars because they'd had 4 years of further development, different body kits and stuff on them. So we had to undevelop all of that, take it back to a body in white on a rotisserie and do it. Ray Hall did most of the work on it. I did most of the research on it, and then we rolled it out just before Monterey Car Week in 2015.
I think that was on Moton 4 Ways. I think that ran.
Yes, it was.
And then when I was at the Motown factory, they actually have the file with all of this. They have the original document of all the setup for that car, which is something you need.
The key to that whole project was having a P60, and rumor had it that we had a P60 in our warehouse that had been removed. 2 of them actually. They were supposed to be sent back to Munich, and they had not been. Thankfully, and so we had 2 P60s in the blue BMW crates that race engines are shipped in.
Super cool.
And Matt and I opened up this crate, and there it was, and we went, "Yes, we can do this." So and then 2 years later, we had it running, and it's the only running P60 GTR in the world at the moment. There's one in the museum. It may not be in there right now, but it goes in and out of the museum. It's the Nürburgring 24 winner. And then there was one recently wrapped in Need for Speed livery.
Look amazing.
Which is the 42 car that also raced in the US for a while and then raced in Europe.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So money, no object. Which BMW car would you buy or own forever?
Own forever. I love race cars. Okay. So I think... It would have to be a race car that is for sale, that it's possible to purchase, and then so I would buy an M8 GTLM.
Okay,
yeah,
good choice.
It's
good choice.
It's an absolutely fabulous race car. I know it wasn't super successful in its time, and most of that's because of BOP, and we just never learned how to properly work the BOP system during that era. But the car is fantastic to drive. It is. It's such a spaceship in so many ways. You know, the E92 M3s were a spaceship when they came out. They were really a moonshot car. It was, the technology in it is amazing. But the M8 GTLM is spectacular.
Yeah. So I'd like to answer this question just because I'll throw it in. I would have the Z4 GT3, the version 2, the extra EVA, I think the widest one that they made, which has the P65 engine, the V8. I just love that Z4 with that wide body, ultra wide, ultra big wing. I just love that race car.
Well, the ultra wide one is the GTLM version.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that was not sold. So the GT3 had the double wing on the back and more soupy, or not flared fenders, but fender extensions, I guess.
Yeah, I think it raced in Europe. I think it won Spa 24 hour, I believe.
That's a GTLM.
That car. That would be the car I would take.
There are only 5 of them. Oh, yeah. We have 4, and then there's the Spa car.
That car was.
You really have 4 of them.
Yeah, we have all 4.
Well, last year when we went to Nürburgring, we went by a buddy of mine's place at 24/7 Performance, and he had that car there.
Oh, okay.
Someone in Germany bought it as their fun car, and he was.
Oh, okay. Well, then it's not a GTLM.
He was going through it. It was.
I've had eyes on all GTLMs recently, so they're still with us.
Good.
All right. So final question for you, Tom. A philosophical one. If you could have dinner with any figure from BMW's history, who would it be, and what would you ask them?
Well,
You probably had dinner with most of them.
I've been very fortunate working in the PR side for the last 15, 16 years or so that I've been able to meet a lot of these people. I've been able to meet probably most of the people that have shaped the company over the years, which is wonderful. I would say probably Paul Rocha, because when I started with the company, he was this god who could design these fantastic engines. I met him once for a very short period of time, but I'm not sure I'd want to have dinner with him. I'd want to go to his workshop rather than have dinner. So, and just talk about this crazy engine stuff that he's messing with. But yeah, it would be Paul Rocha, which unfortunately he died several years ago. But I saw him and said hello and introduced myself at the 100th anniversary of BMW in Munich at the Olympic Gardens.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And then soon, it wasn't very long afterwards that he passed away, fortunately.
Yeah. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. We definitely have to do a follow-up at some point on, I guess, just the M3 alone, because there are a lot of more stories there to be told. I think in between the two of you, we could definitely share some details on those cars that many people might not know, or Might have to use ChatGPT to find them probably, so might be easier to do
No
a
chat
podcast.
GPT. No. We're not doing that.
So I guess we'll do another podcast. Well, once again, thank you so much. Good luck at the Daytona
Thank you.
tomorrow on the weekend. Hopefully there is a good win coming out.
Hopefully we do quite well. It's going to be cold, which is going to make it interesting, but dry, thankfully. So let's see.
All right, sounds good. Well, guys, thanks for watching as always, and we'll see you in the next one.